Hello, my most amazing artists. Today we're going to learn to create a still life like the artist Paul Cezanne. Paul Cezanne is known for his beautiful still life paintings, which are often filled with fruit. So today we're going to take a look at the still life that I have set up. You can see we have some sort of a vessel or vase or pitcher. There are apples and pear, and then there's a whole bowl of apples. And we're going to use this to help us guide our drawing and our composition. So let's get started. The materials I have today are our basic materials that we've been using in art class so far. I have a plain piece of paper. I have some watercolor paints. I have my brush. I have some water. And if you don't happen to have watercolor paints or any paints for that matter, because this will work with anything, you can also just use markers, crayons, even just a pencil to shade your still life. So here we go. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is kind of map out our basic composition. So remembering that we had that pitcher, we had the bowl, and then we had several pieces of fruit that were kind of loose. So I'm going to just pick a shade that you can see, and I can tell when I outline. I'm going to use that to outline my shapes. The first thing I'm going to take a look at is that pitcher or the vessel. Now, when you break an object down into basic lines, your vessels can look like any of these. It doesn't even have to look like the one that's pictured, just as long as we have some sort of base or something, then that would be fine. So you can choose to do something like this with just some basic circle shapes. This is a little bit more fancy. This one looks more like an urn. And then we have your just typical bowl. So you can decide what works for you. Now I'm going to give you a little tip. Whatever object, you want to make it fairly large on your paper. You don't want this little teeny tiny vase, especially when you have larger pieces of fruit. So you want to make sure it is going to be kind of the main focus and take up the majority of your paper. You could even start something as simple as just making a large circle and then giving it a fishtail. That would work fine too. So there's our basic vase shape. If you wanted to get fancy and add a handle, you could, or you can even just leave it as it is. So the next shape that we're going to block out is that bowl that we saw. So I'm just going to, again, use my paint and come on over and give it a smile. Again, keeping it rather large. And I'm going to put just a few lines down here because I do know that there's some fruit in the front, so I want to keep that in mind. I'm going to add some fruit to our bowl. One, maybe overlap them a little, 2, 3. Again, keeping it larger rather than smaller. And then I'm going to focus on creating some of the fruit that I saw on the table kind of in front. So now we have some in front. So I'm going to look at the apple that we have and tilt this back so you can see, oops, wrong way. This way. There we go. Now we have our apple in the front. So just basic circle shape would be good to give you at least your idea where it's going to go. Then I had a pear. So the pear has a slightly different shape. It's kind of rounded at the bottom, and I'm just going to connect these lines. And then there was an additional apple kind of on its side tilted. It doesn't matter. Still going to make a circle, but watch what I use. I'll do something to it to kind of give it that shape that's going to make it look like it's rolling that way. Now I'm just going to go ahead and focus on giving a table line here in the back, so just to kind of break up the background a little bit. And now I'm going to get ready to add some of my colors. So just again, a real quick little tip, if you want to show directionality, you can just give it a little smile and then a little line. This one, if I want to make it look like it's rolling this way, just a little further down. Same thing over here, maybe this one's just sitting. And even the ones that are in the bowl, give them some sort of directionality. So now I have everything kind of blocked out. So it's time to think about adding some of the main colors. So I'm actually going to do something you might not have thought of, which is going to be coloring or painting in the background first. So I'm going to use a purplish color. I'm going to even take a slightly bigger brush so I don't take up quite as much of your time. I'm going to paint quick brush strokes. I kind of like the idea of some of them showing, but I don't want to color on top of my still life. So I'm going to outline that a bit first, and then I can come back and just grab the paint and drag it over so that line kind of disappears, but I'm not making a mess on my painting. So I'm going to come on over. And if this is a little too much, you can always add you can add some blue into your purple and give it kind of a violet blue color, or you can add another shade like a reddish or pinkish tone to your background. I can still see those lines, so I'm going to kind of come back and feather them out here. There, that's better. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is just paint my entire table around the fruit. And that is going to be just kind of a white and whatever is left on my brush from that purple. So it's going to have kind of that light purple, I guess you could say. And I'm just going to come around my fruit, a couple of spots here, come back, get some more. You might not hardly be able to see any color at all, and that's okay because my tablecloth is actually white in that picture in our still life setup, but I'm just gonna give it a little shade. All right, so now we're going to come back and take a look at adding the color for the base. So I want to get rid of that line that kind of went across the middle because now I want to make it look like one shape. So I'm going to get my blue and just kind of fill in. Activating with water will help to erase those lines. And it's okay if some of them show through anyway because it'll just add some texture to those base lines here. So, and if I want the pear to kind of pop in front, I'm gonna leave that out for a second. Okay, now I'm going to add some blue, maybe a little bit darker over here. There we go. Okay, so now I have my base. Now I'm going to add my color for my bowl. Now, if I wanted to leave it mostly blue, I could. I could add a stripe, leave it white. You kind of decide what you think you will work. I might add just a little bit of blue in there. Okay, finally onto the apples. The apples we're going to do are not going to be completely all red. Notice that the apples in the still life have these different shades of yellow and some highlights. So we're going to include those in our painting. So when I grab some red, I'm going to come on over and paint only on a side and leave a side open for some of those unique highlights. So I have a little bit of purple mixed in there, so I'm going to come back and get some more red. And you can always layer watercolor paint. So I'm going to come on over here to my apples that are in my bowl. And again, I'm going to leave the top up there kind of just to show that there's going to be some highlights. Come on over here. Maybe they're more on the top of this apple. And the last apple here. You can even with your brush kind of show the roundness of an object just by kind of using sideways strokes. Okay, I still have one more apple. There we go. Looks good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just clean our brush and then get a little bit of yellow. So we're going to add some of those yellow highlights. And it's okay if the yellow kind of mixes with the red and gives it those golden highlights. Just make sure you take your brush and really work it in the whole space. So here I come over here, and it's actually mixing a little with the blue, making a little bit that golden color, which is perfectly fine with me. Makes it look all the more realistic. Okay, same with that. You can even drag some of that color down, mixing it in with the red. Same thing on all your other apples. This is my favorite part of painting, giving it these kind of color mixing highlights and shadows. Okay, so now my last apple, you might want to, because that one's dry probably a little more than all the others, I'm just going to add some water just to kind of melt those colors together. Okay, so now I'm ready to talk about that pear. So I'm going to start off by coloring or painting the pear entirely yellow. Don't worry about that line. Watch, I'll show you how we can kind of cover it up. Okay, so I painted all in yellow. And now we're going to add some of those same shadows, except this time we're going to add those shadows with a little bit different mixture of colors. I'm going to use some dark green, and even we'll talk about how to make some of that natural looking brown. So I'm going to use some dark green here to fill in, and kind of, that's where we're going to kind of cover up that line over there, blend it in a little. Just adding a tiny bit of water makes it kind of all melt together. Just going to come back in with a little bit more of that yellow. Perfect. I love it. Now we're going to also add some shadows that were, again, I mentioned that brownish color. So if you have something like a plastic lid even, you start off by adding some of that red and then going back, cleaning the brush, and getting some brown or some green. I meant to say, we're going to make brown. And you can see how it kind of creates this smoky brown green kind of shade that I'm going to use now to kind of come in and give some shadows, so where it would be on the table. So you can kind of fill in some there. You might even be able to fill in some in between your apples. There would probably be some shading. Maybe on the table, there might be some around the apple. So think about where you might end up with shades and shadows, probably somewhere where there's a surface that's touching the table or touching another piece of fruit even. You can kind of come in and add some of that color that you created. So notice it's kind of like a grayish, brownish. You kind of made it yourself. So it kind of has unique there. So now I have my shades and shadows. Like that. There might even be some in there because that's a little corner and nook where everything kind of comes together. Maybe over here. Right. Okay. So now we're going to come in and just add some of the highlights that we want to add to our bowl, our vessel over here, and then maybe even some fruit. So now we're going to use the same technique. So I'm going to use that either a really darker, much darker shade and kind of come in. And now I'm going to really focus on my strokes so that it kind of makes it look like it's curving. The vessel's curving. Make sure I fill in all those spaces that I don't want peeking out anymore. Filling in. Maybe it has that round top. Now it's a chance for me to kind of highlight the fact that maybe it's open. I'm going to fill that in. Try to cover up all those extra spaces. Notice this side is much lighter, and I might even add some white watercolor paint, which doesn't show up so much as it does kind of just blends in those highlight. So now we're going to add as if the light is coming from this side. So the same thing, maybe I'll add some of that pure white, just a small little speck on my apple, not everywhere, just where it would kind of catch the light. Maybe it catches the light a tiny bit here and there. Okay, I'm going to do maybe a few on my apples. Great. Now I'm going to fill in this space over here where my bowl is so I don't have any white peeking through there. And using a paintbrush to create your picture is forgiving because you can always add, take some away, use a sponge, kind of dab up some of your water. If you don't like the color, try again. It's kind of forgiving in that sense. So you don't have to worry about making a mistake because it's just something that you can add into your design or change as you go along. So I'm just going to add some more shading into my tablescape here, maybe some white, maybe a little bit of that purple blending in with my shadows. And we are nearly finished. Maybe a little white in your background. And don't forget, once it dries, to sign your work like an artist. Enjoy making still lifes. Hopefully, keep on creating. See you next time.